A decision will happen today on whether the Alice Springs town will have its youth curfew extended. We'll get that at 2 o'clock today. In the meantime, let's talk live to Labor MP for Lingiari, Marion Scrymgour. Thanks for your time. How, in your view, has this curfew gone and should it be extended?
Yeah, look, I think, getting around Alice Springs, talking to people at the markets on Sunday, but just talking to business owners and people who have, done a lot of investment, and not just non-Aboriginal people. I mean, Aboriginal people as well. I mean, in the tourism sector. So everyone wants this to work. I think the curfew was a great circuit breaker. It just put some calm in place that needed to be put in place. I think, whilst people have criticised it and talked about the distress of particularly some of those young people, and we do need to deal with some of that beyond this curfew, but also, during this time, we need to take stock and have a look at what are some of the long-term strategies and work that we need to do. And that's certainly a lot of work that I've been doing in and around Alice Springs over the last, couple of days. But since the weekend, getting some of that positive feedback, I think, is what we need to do.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the medium and longer term, but this particular curfew, this sort of latest wave of crime, if you like, did seem to largely come out of one particular feud or argument, or call it what you will. Has that cooled enough to end the curfew in your view?
No, look, I think everybody agrees, and whether you're, from Aboriginal people in some of the town camps, or whether you're an Aboriginal person from some of the remote communities, I think, Tom, what we need to do as a federal government is work with those communities, but also work with the Northern Territory government to put in place, fulfill our obligations in terms of jobs, housing, all of these areas that people have been calling for some time. But look at how do we re-engage these young people in education, which is critical, because a lot of those young people are disengaged, whether it's from the education system or they're just not doing anything. There's no employment opportunities. So we need to look at how do we do that better.
I know you've been quite outspoken around parents and whether they're taking enough responsibility. Let me put this to you. So if you've got an Indigenous child in a home that is safe, I think it would always be a red line if it's not a safe home, that they couldn't keep living in it. It's safe, but it's not conducive to them attending school. What should happen then? Is it going too far to take that child out of that home? When you're talking about an Indigenous child, you've got sensitivities around the stolen generation. Is there another path? I know you've spoken about, and other people have spoken about, grandparents as well. Is that a difficult sort of middle ground situation to know what to do?
Yeah, Tom, I often get a bit cranky when people use the issues of the stolen generation as an excuse not to do anything. I think what happened with stolen generation was an issue that happened many years ago, and my father was part of those children that were taken off his land and brought up elsewhere, and he never ever reunited with his family right up until he died. So there were different, it was a different circumstance. What we have now, and what I've been outspoken about, and I've said a number of times, let's stop skirting around the edges of this. If there are families that are doing it tough, and there are young people that are suffering, and so if we're looking at the interest of the child, why can't we put in place family responsibility agreements so that it doesn't have to be a punitive thing. It's about wrapping the necessary services around that family in the interest of the child to get a better outcome than what's been happening at the moment. Now, family responsibility agreements are in place in legislation in the Northern Territory in the early 2000s. That's been removed. That needs to go back into legislation, and we need to get those responsibility agreements happening again.
And so when you're talking about that, yeah, when you're talking about that, sorry, so this is an arrangement where it might be aunts, uncles, it might be grandparents taking care of children rather than parents, and making sure that's a bit more formalised than it happens at the moment. And that, I know that can mean where the funding actually goes directly to, for example, those grandparents rather than to the parents still.
Yeah, look, the welfare payment that a lot of these families get, they shouldn't be allowed to have that welfare payment and then just blow it on grog and other activities, and particularly if that money isn't being spent on those little ones. So we've got to be brave enough to say enough's enough, and let's look at what we need to put in place, because to allow another generation to be lost here, because that's what's happening, is because of inaction, because we're not dealing with the tough issues, because we're not brave enough to call out and say, there are problems here with our families. Any approach doesn't have to be punitive, but we've got to draw a line in the sand somewhere,
Okay.
Tom, particularly if we say this is in the interest of that young person or that child. I've always advocated for safe and secure facilities, which is quite separate from boarding facilities, because if a child doesn't feel safe at home and they're on the streets of Alice Springs or Catherine or Tennant Creek, if we've got young people on the street and they don't feel safe at home, where do you take them? It's a no-brainer to put that kid back into the same environment. But we need to have safe and secure facilities where those young people can go to, and then territory families, the police and other service providers, because the non-government sector also has to step up here. It shouldn't just be about government doing the hard yards. There's a lot of people that are funded to do these programs. So we all need to come together in the interest of trying to resolve this issue. Alice is like things have settled a little bit. I'm hoping that the curfew will be extended for a bit longer to allow certain strategies to be put in place.
All right. Look, as you allude to there, it's complex, a lot of different factors at place, but just about everyone wants in some way to avoid, this sort of generational wave, if you like, of all the elements that are not happening in terms of closing the gap. Marion Scrymgour, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Tom.